we bring on a new client, it wasn't just the salesperson that was on those meetings.
Right.
Talking to the client. We had technical team members on to provide their expertise, whatever that specific, main topic of discussion was,
Right.
or that pain point was. And so when they finally, get over the finish line, it's a celebration of like, hey,
Yeah.
this wasn't just the sales organization. This was everybody who was a part of it. And the fact that we could speak to the services that we have was because of the engine that we have behind
Right.
us, right? And
Right.
so it's this team effort, and it's this, and we're small enough still as well, actually, where every new client that we come on is lifting all of us up.
Welcome to Syncronized, the podcast that drives MSP growth from startup to scale up. In each episode, we dive into the topics that matter most to IT providers, such as automation, AI, service delivery, and profitability. Join us as we engage with experts and gain hands-on insights and practical advice you can directly apply to propel your forward. Let's dive in.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Synchronized. I'm really excited to be joined today by Corbitt Grow, Director of Business Development at Anderson Technologies. We've got a really fun topic today. It's the idea of scaling your sales team as your MSP grows, right? There's a very common thread in this market of the stuff that got you from, the early in the garage startup days to stage one is not the same set of disciplines and people and process and kind of success metrics that are going to get you to stage two and stage three and beyond. So really excited to kind of highlight that today, specifically through a sales lens and kind of diving into that side of the organization. Corbitt, thank you so much for taking time to join us here on Synchronized.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Brandon. Thanks.
Before we dive into it, we'd love to give you a minute to talk a little bit about yourself, your role at Anderson, and just kind of frame, your background and experience here for our viewers.
Yeah. So Anderson Technologies, we're a managed IT services firm out of St. Louis, and I'd say that we're in kind of the mid-tier space as a provider. We're not really, really small anymore, but we're also not one of the kind of conglomerates that are out there. We're in that middle spot, which I think is a really unique place to be. But my role, Director of Business Development, really account management and sales. And so we've got a team that obviously is handling the day-to-day. But now I've been able to focus a lot more on new logo, getting out there and getting our name out there. And we've done a lot more on the marketing side as well. But yeah, it's great to be here, and I'm excited to talk with you.
Awesome. Well, I love that you've already kind of gone through some of those growth periods and probably can offer some great perspective on, here's the stuff we were doing in the early days that we're no longer doing. And here's some of the newer, more mature, side of the house that we're starting to build. So let's get into it. I want to start in an area that I think is probably interesting to a lot of our viewers when they think about kind of scaling the technology side of the house as it relates to sales, which is, in the very early days, you've probably got a couple of services. Maybe you've got a all-you-can-eat model to try and keep things sort of simple. But over time, that portfolio is likely to expand, right? Over the last several years, I'd say many MSPs have brought cybersecurity into the mix in more meaningful ways. Maybe backup and business continuity offerings have evolved. There's more than the basic, endpoint monitoring and ticketing, right? There's a lot more on the table today. Network stuff, there's a lot more on the table now than even just, a handful of years ago. I'd love to get some insight from you on how does your sales team need to evolve as the kind of SKUs that you have available to sell and the portfolio of services that you're offering really, kind of expands and widens? Are there changes in process? Are there changes in incentives and comp models? And can we sort of frame some, advice and perspective from folks that are saying, okay, I want to add more to my services portfolio. I want to maybe get some higher margin offerings under my belt. How do I equip my sales team and set them up for success as we bring some new, shiny bells and whistles out to potential buyers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think in our mind, I think probably for most folks in the space, I think the end goal is usually always to earn kind of the long-term recurring managed IT services business. That's what we want to get to eventually, just because that is such a wonderful model to be in. But I think one of the things that we did find is that this is probably about a year and a half ago. Our service offerings are for our current clients for the most part where we focus them, but we really broke that out into essentially like a service catalog, you call it, where we had essentially all these things that even for non-clients would be services of value that, just because they're not under our management, they would still be things that other companies, other organizations would benefit from. And so we decided to kind of dissect what we were already doing for our full service clients and piece that out into smaller offerings. And now those are somewhat spear tip offerings that we can now put out there. So if we're having conversations and maybe the full gamut of MSP services isn't what they're looking for, but there are these certain piecemeal items that are, and then that's a great opportunity for us to get in there and show them what we're capable of. And hopefully they say, oh, this is also, an awesome group of people, but give us a chance to really showcase our stuff on a much smaller scale. And once your foot's in the door, that obviously opens up for other opportunities in the future or expansion once you are working with them. So that's probably one thing that we've done. But outside of that, I mean, we're always going to be focusing on that long-term relationship style. But one of the things we did too is pull one of our highest technical people and really put them in more of an R&D role as well, just to be focused on what other offerings are out there, what are other folks doing, and really to dedicate that time into the research of, playing with margin, playing with what things are out there. And that way on the sales side, we can really focus on the relationships and getting out there and getting in front of people. And then we can be equipped with new things as they come. But I don't know, there is an absolute balance though, because we never ever want to be pushing anything on clients, because we want to be trusted, right? We don't want them to feel like every time the account manager reaches out, it's because there's a new shiny object that can be sold to them. I would call that, I don't know, bleeding edge, right?
Sure.
We don't want to do that. So it is that balance, right? Of, hey, what actually makes sense, and then what meets the client's needs, and then that's where the research goes into play and finding what exactly does meet their need, or something that the market is telling us they need, and that's a way for us to get out there. But for us, I think the end goal is almost always to get back to the long-term MSP and full management, but it's those kind of project items that we've been able to piecemeal out and offer on more of an a la carte basis.
Sure. Yeah, that's really interesting. There's a couple of good themes there to kind of unpack. One, I almost like some of the reverse directioning you're doing on that, which is, hey, we've got some customers that are already all in, full suite of services. Is there work we're doing for them that we're really good at today that we know is scalable, that we can kind of, tease out of that and use maybe as a foot in the door for a new prospect, maybe even as some competitive displacement? Like, hey, you don't have to give us all of your business just yet. I know you're already working with a provider that you might be happy with. Let us take on a project or two and sort of feel it out and get a sense of how we might work together. And then if you do a great job of that, you've got a hook in and a foot in the door. And then you're, as you mentioned, kind of ultimately working toward the longer sale and starting to see if you can coax a couple of those other parts of the agreement out, into your wheelhouse as well.
Yeah. And we kind of call it the monkey paw, right?
Sure.
Getting that in there. But yeah, so it's definitely something that we're trying to do. I had another thought, but I think it'll come back to me. So we can keep going.
Sure. It's also interesting to the idea of having someone, one of your more seasoned folks kind of running some of that financial modeling. When we kicked off the episode here, we talk about, well, what is the difference between some of those early stage habits and kind of mindset versus that more mid growth stage thinking? I think that's a really interesting one that you're getting at. It in the early days, let's sell anything to anyone that's willing to write us a check, and someone is asking for whatever, this sort of cloud migration service. So we don't do that today, but don't worry, we'll figure it out. We'll go get certified. We'll go get the technology. We'll learn it so that we can sell it to you. And I think a big part of the evolution is knowing where your superpowers are, where you want to lean in, where you don't want to step in, and where you don't have a certain area of expertise, and sort of extending that thinking over to the finance side of the business is really interesting. And I'll put out a proactive thought for viewers who might be thinking, well, yeah, great, but I don't have some, FP&A wizard on my team that can help me run, all these models and sims and stuff. I've had a couple conversations with other folks lately in a similar realm here where they talk about almost like a fractional CFO type services, or getting consultants or contractors come in, run some of these numbers, do some of these calculations, and then provide that kind of strategic business plan. It can relate to what you're offering. It can relate to pricing and packaging and the way you're charging. I talk with a lot of MSPs that, really, again, the pricing model and structure that they have on day one is just not a super scalable, kind of menu of items. So oftentimes there's a need to kind of evolve and mature and up-level the way that stuff is organized and assembled from a go-to-market perspective. So I like that idea of let's sort of reevaluate and have someone come in and whether it's internal or consultant, right, sort of take an objective look at where do we make the most money? How do we track our own time and hours more effectively so that we can actually better measure where our margins are and where they aren't? I think that's another one of those, kind of growth challenges is people know what doing the work feels like, but they're not actually looking at how many hours on average are we spending on these tickets every day or whatever, right? Whatever the metric is that you might be a little bit of a blind spot to you that's holding you back from some of those kind of growth targets and next steps.
Yeah. And when you're IT is one of those things where it feels like there are fires all the time. And so it's not, you don't have the time when you're in the early stages to dedicate towards research and getting and thinking about those types of things proactively and being really strategic on it. But yeah, that's exactly why we feel like it's important to be able to look beyond your little world of what you're working with,
right,
and see what else is happening and what other things you can be doing. Because there could be things that you can slot in that you're already doing, but they can provide for greater margin or more bang for the buck for the end user, for the client. And I did just remember the thought that left me earlier on kind of piecemealing projects and whatnot. I was talking with somebody earlier today actually, and just he has internal IT experience working at a large company and then working in MSP. And he says, on average, MSPs, because you see so much, there's so much breadth around doing different types of projects and how to do things. And you see you have so much exposure to all different types of environments that the ability to move quickly is a lot better with MSPs versus internal IT. And he was making this comparison of this particular project we were talking about is, internal IT might take 6 to 9 months to do that. But he's like, if we were to do it, it'd be like 4 to 6 weeks.
Right.
And so that is an edge there, I think, as well. So approaching teams that have internal IT, we're not there to steal or replace them, but to, hey, what are things that are going to be this huge drawn out project for you that maybe we can come in, supplement it, do it in a lot shorter of a time frame and work hand in hand with you. So just going back to that previous thought, that's something that I think is overlooked for a lot of folks.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And it really does feel like a overlooked territory, as you said. It's this idea that you're not replacing or displacing folks that are in there. You're kind of co-managing and partnering, and also you have the benefit of not having their day job to do if they're doing some amount of daily firefighting and ticketing and
Exactly.
user administration and account provisioning and all that nonsense. So the idea that maybe both parties have the skill set, but where is the smartest use of time and resources and budgeting across both parties? And again, I just to sort of loop all of this back up to the thread of kind of operational maturity and sales maturity as the business evolves, that's really where you take on more of that strategic partner and advisor role that separates a great MSP from, a break fix shop or just someone that's kind of keeping the lights on and sort of doing bare minimum. It's much stickier and more, powerful for you to be able to say, look, we're not trying to take a job or a workload away from you. We're going to absorb some of this stuff that we can do faster and at the same level of skill or accuracy so that you can go focus on whatever the next thing is that you've got to deal with that we're not maybe positioned to do because we don't live within your organization, even though we kind of co-manage and partner. So I think there's value to be had there and good kind of, business acumen is maybe the wrong word, but good sort of practice and discipline to think about whether it's a co-managed environment where you have some internal, champions and counterparts that know what you're talking about. And even when you don't, to still be able to work with, I don't know, your office admins and some of those folks that didn't apply for an IT role, but realistically they're doing a little bit of it here and there because that's just what, life in a small business tends to look like. Everybody's wearing multiple hats, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm curious on this thread of again, we sort of touched on it, like in the early days, you're just going to sell to anybody, right? We need as much revenue as possible. We want to get out of break fix, presumably, if you've been doing that. And we want to move, as you mentioned a number of times, we want to really move to as much of that recurring revenue model as possible. And I also think you made a smart point that even when we're doing project work and billable hours, we're thinking about it through a lens of how can we turn this into annual revenue ultimately, and just always making sure that you're trying to keep march down the path of sure we'll get started this way, or we can take on some extra stuff in the background if you need help with something that falls out of our normal monthly scope. But whenever possible, you want to look for opportunities to really solidify and lock in that revenue. But when you get more mature as an organization in this space, you're going to have a better understanding of kind of an ideal customer profile, where your best business opportunities lie, which of your current customers are most profitable, and which relationships offer the most kind of win-win. The other side of the spectrum is the running joke that the noisiest, most difficult clients are always the ones that are paying you the least and that have the biggest set of demands and all that. So to pull this back to the sales org, how do I kind of work with reps and account managers and such to make sure that they are focused on the right opportunities as you get a better sense and a better definition of what those actually look like moving forward?
Yeah, well, defining it is what's most important. I'm not sure are you familiar with EOS, the entrepreneurial operations?
Sure.
Yeah, so we're an EOS company. We run on EOS. I think like 300,000 companies in the US do at this point, or maybe that's globally. But part of EOS is obviously it's an operational framework. It's a communication framework for companies, but a big part of that is understanding core values, but also what's your vision, what's your purpose, why as a company are you doing what you're doing, and part of that is who do you serve. And so ongoing at a leadership team level are talking about what are our target clients and why. And it's not just about industry that does play a big part in that, but it also comes down to core values and what kinds of companies. If someone views IT as, the boogeyman or the power center,
Right.
that's probably not going to be the best client to work with, organization to work with, because that means every time you bring a recommendation, they're likely going to simply view it as a dollar figure expenditure that they really don't want to have to do if they don't want to, versus viewing it as a lever for growth, a lever for productivity, and a way to ensure the continuity of the organization as a whole from a security level, right? So those things core values aren't the only way to view that, because you can have wonderful people, wonderful organizations that simply don't have the funds to provide for that kind of infrastructure. But those are the types of things that we think through, and that goes hand in hand with industry as well. So I think once we have that established, we then are talking about it all the time with the rest of the team. And so, you mentioned in the sales and account management side, it's understanding that. And so on the sales side, looking for those types of companies. And when we're out and about, or if we're seeing things, or going to current clients that we know fit that profile,
right?
Hey, we love working with you all. Who else do you know that's like you? And I know that's common, right? It's referrals, but it's like-minded people and like-minded business owners, executives, et cetera, chances are have peers that are of a very similar profile as them.
Absolutely, especially when you're getting into some of these specific industries or verticals. If you're running IT and you're specializing in private law practice or small medical provider type arrangements, dentists are hanging out with other dentists at conferences and trade shows and small business meetups and such, in the same way that we're hanging out with other MSPs and technology vendors and folks in the space. So I think people want to say referrals are dead, word of mouth is dead. You need to have, commercial grade marketing. And there's some truth to the fact that well dries up eventually, but I also feel like folks might overlook at times just how much opportunity there is to mine within existing customer bases if you've got the right relationships and the right rapport and some of the other dynamics that we're talking about here. If they're not happy with you and they see you just as that cost center, they're probably not going to be making a line around the block to give you a bunch of referrals and recommend all their friends and peers, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then even for you mentioned like the noisiest clients, all right, tend to be the ones that maybe aren't paying the most, right? I know that's a running joke in the industry, but a big kind of reminder that I provide to our team is, look, who are our quietest clients and why? Why is that the case, right? And so number one, why is that? Chances are it's because we've leveled up their infrastructure and things are in a really good spot. And so they've invested into doing the right things, you could say. And so therefore, guess what? They don't have to call us as much because things are in a really good spot. And so those stories we try and tell to these other clients that maybe haven't taken the time to invest, but also just for someone, you never want to ignore your quietest clients either. Just because they don't reach out doesn't mean you shouldn't be reaching out to them.
For sure.
They may want to hear from you. And so again, it's easy to get caught up in the fires and the things that pop up, but it's really important to provide, just like I think even from a people level, you've probably got your people who are really competent, who are your rock stars. You may not even think about them because you're worried about your people who are maybe needing more assistance and are your problem child, someone might say, right? But you still have to dedicate time to your rock stars too, even if they don't ask for help, all that, because at the end of the day, neglect could lead to them leaving the organization, or on the client side leaving you as well. So
1000%. I again, not to just dabble in all these cliches, but there is such an out of sight, out of mind challenge in this industry, particularly when you get into things like security and some of these more modern services where, the better you are at it, the less you're talking to a customer about it. That's a very unique dynamic, and you don't want to be you don't want to have a client or an employee internally be one phone call away from saying, oh, maybe there is some greener grass out there that I'll go check out, right? When they've got competitors closing in and other opportunities there, you want them to feel like, no way. Like I just heard from Corbitt last week. He gave me some awesome reporting about everything that Anderson is doing behind the scenes to keep us covered. Like, no thanks. I'm happy with our current provider. And there is, I mean, it's a challenge to keep all these plates spinning, particularly in these smaller early stages of an MSP where you just don't have the staff or the resourcing for it necessarily. But it's so critical, and look to your tool set maybe to automate some of the reporting and insights here if it's if it's difficult to kind of run it manually. But you've got to find a way to balance that constant value demonstration and articulation so that even when you're not on site plugging something back into the wall or hitting the phones, closing out tickets, helping people troubleshoot stuff or screen remoting into devices and whatnot, that folks still remember, oh yeah, I totally know why we're writing that check at the end of every month. We're getting a lot of value there, even if I'm not, having a bunch of issues or problems that have to be dealt with.
Yeah, it's unfortunately I love what you said. The better you do at it, chances are that means the less you're going to have interaction.
Yeah.
And that's also a thing that you got to have to kind of get constantly, not remind clients of, but hope that you find ways to make sure that they can acknowledge that and know that, hey, just because I don't see you doesn't mean you're not working for me.
Right. Absolutely. So let me ask, in terms of kind of day-to-day boots on the ground, like as we go through some of these growth stages and think about these kind of mind shifts over the years and an evolving MSP, like are reps incentivized or goaled differently? Like, am I going after target accounts? Are you looking through your roster and saying, hey, you know what? We don't have like a deep vertical specialization, at the core of our business right now. However, we're doing pretty good with these, I don't know, education K through 12. I'll make something up. Are you going out and saying, you know what? Let's go try to find and hunt for a couple more of these because we've got some really profitable customers already that fall into that vertical, and our reps getting, I don't know, better commission, better incentive? Like, how do you sort of, play a little bit of Sudoku so that your team is really incentivized to spend their time in the right places and kind of hone in on the right targets? The more you spend time kind of doing that modeling and analysis and understanding, oh, this is actually where our biggest opportunities look like they're going to lie for the next, 6 to 12 months.
Yeah. We, on kind of the commission side of things, we haven't adjusted anything to make that more lucrative. Maybe we should, to incentivize, but and I guess maybe in terms of looking for, you mentioned like looking at the roster and who do we want to potentially bring in also to help go after those target client profiles. That's a big thing that we think about is think about, I don't know, the financial industry versus manufacturing versus K through 12, like you said. Very different profiles of people that work in those industries, right? And so how do you need somebody, whatever your target vertical is, finding reps and bringing people in who can fit that. I mean, it maybe sounds superficial, but someone who can talk that language, and obviously, especially maybe finance, right? There's a lot of jargon and maybe it's viewed as this club almost, right? So somebody who you feel like, hey, who can talk that language and keep up with that and feel like they can fit in those groups, in those conversations. Those are the types of people that definitely we're looking for each of those industry segments. And we have a small team, but it's thinking about those things because at the end of the day, that's who's representing, Anderson Technologies, your brand. And so how do you want them to walk into that room? And so that plays a huge part in who we consider on the sales and account management side.
For sure. It makes a ton of sense. I also think it's interesting, it's my default go-to instinct when I'm hiring and growing a sales org is probably going to be, I should find folks that have experience within MSP orgs that have sold technology services before because they're going to know the vocabulary. They're going to be able to talk the talk. Well, maybe the challenge on that or an alternate perspective on that is, find folks that have been really effective selling into medical, into legal offices and firms, into K through 12. Mm-hmm. The technology and the portfolio of offerings that you sell, I mean, a good rep should be able to acclimate and get a sense of and kind of, learn enough to be dangerous. What's really hard is to get someone that's got maybe 10 years of experience within an MSP as a sales rep, but hasn't spent time in the clubs with the jargon, with all the acronyms. I mean, geez, it's enough to keep up with, what we talk about on a daily basis from an IT perspective, let alone, the other, what feel like quote unquote foreign languages from some of these other industries and markets where it just, for me at least, goes way over my head after a certain, degree of complexity is reached. So it's an interesting balance to look for folks that know the IT space, but also if you feel like you're really hedging a bet on a particular industry or vertical or sort of niche market that feels very profitable and opportunistic for you, look for folks that come from that world. You know the technology well enough to teach them that side of it. They know the industry well enough to teach you that side of it. And then it's, kind of your 1 + 1 = 3, and it benefits everybody, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it is also too, I mean, just because someone has worked in sales at an MSP does not mean that they understand and would fit necessarily well into how you operate as an MSP. Because
also very true.
What I found is that we're very different, right? Obviously, a lot of us are very similar, but the inner workings, I mean, our most recent hire on the account management side came from another MSP. And I think what he found was that just the way that our teams operate with one another, he came from a slightly smaller firm, but just the way that happened, because I think one of the best ways to sell isn't just obviously about the products and services, all that. It's also being able to understand what the delivery of something is going to look like once the sale is made, around talking to that. So just because somebody, again, has been at an MSP doesn't necessarily mean that they know how we do things. And if anything, sometimes I found that they can bring with them, I'm not going to call them bad habits, but different habits that you
a little bit of baggage.
Maybe you have to work a little harder to correct. And so, like you said, maybe if they don't have specific MSP experience, that could also be a benefit, because now you're able to show them the ropes specifically with how you want that to operate within your world. But yeah, MSP sales, though, I would think in my experience, are some of the hardest sales out there. I came from AT&T prior to this in the enterprise fiber, cybersecurity solutions, things like that. Those are somewhat widget type sales, right? Where it's a lot more packaged and a lot more transactional. I thought that I worked hard there, and I did. And then before I came in to Anderson Technologies, and I didn't mention this, we're a second generation family business. And so actually my mother and father-in-law are the ones that started the firm about 30 years ago. And before I came in, they said, Corbitt, just want to warn you, MSP, managed services, the quote was, it's a slog. And that wasn't saying it in a bad way, but just these are sales where trust and that relationship are so critical. And so it is often a slow burn, and it takes patience, takes a lot of grit to make it through that. But it's obviously rewarding, right, with that recurring model that you can end up finding yourself in. So I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but
I mean, it's so true. And I love hearing that. I think so many businesses in this space can be generational. And again, I think that the nature of both the internal management of the business and the customer facing side of it, it's just all human centric. It's not transactional. It is based on trust and partnership and reliability and accountability. And it takes a lot of time to push the boulder up that hill, and only a couple of small missteps, unfortunately, to start to lose some of that solid footing once you finally get it. So you do have to put the time in. You do have to be methodical and careful, and not approach it in this sort of purely transactional, hey, well, thanks for signing, we'll see you next year when it's time to re-ink our agreement or whatever. So good, important reminders for anybody in this space. And I think it's obvious, or at least makes sense at an abstract level, but to know it and then to sort of live that way in your day-to-day, when you're firefighting, when you're running day-to-day IT operations, which realistically is very often a thankless job and just hard to
100%.
sort of get the, that minute-to-minute, recognition and validation that is often more deserved than it is awarded or recognized, right? So it's a hard industry to keep up in day to day, for sure.
Totally. Yeah. And I think you mentioned it's being a thankless industry, right? Our technical team members, they're the ones that are really on the front line with the end user. They're dealing with the brunt of everything that kind of being an MSP comes with. And I think one of the things that we tried to do as well on the sales side is, throughout any sales conversation, when we bring on a new client, it wasn't just the salesperson that was on those meetings.
Right.
Client, we had technical team members on to provide their expertise, whatever that specific main topic of discussion was, or that pain point was. And so when they finally get over the finish line, it's a celebration of like, hey, this wasn't just the sales organization, this was everybody who was a part of it. And the fact that we could speak to the services that we have was because of the engine that we have behind us, right? And so it's this team effort, and it's this and we're small enough still as well, actually, where every new client that we come on is lifting all of us up. And so it's a thankless job. And so finding ways to like say thank you on behalf of, for things that they're not maybe hearing on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis for new clients coming in. That's a great way for sales, I think, to try and make sure that operations is and the technical team is staying, feeling like they're a part of it as well.
Absolutely. And you're right that even if you're not necessarily getting it externally as much as it's deserved, you do have control over it internally within your own four
exactly.
walls. So you do always have the ability to take that extra step and reward and recognize, when folks are, stepping up and meeting, some of these challenges. You talked a little bit about hiring and some of the new folks that have come on. I'm curious, and I'm sure there's no, one size fits all blueprint here, but right, as the company grows, as we're ready to take on more business, we're going to hire some more technical folks. Maybe we're going to hire some more reps as well. What does that look like? Is it like, am I bringing on less hunters and more farmers? Am I shifting away from just new acquisition and trying to build what sounds like you're developing, which is more of an account management type model? Like what is sort of that evolution of the head count within the sales org look like as we go through some of these growth stages that we've been talking about here?
I don't know if we've fully solved that one yet.
Sure.
It's tricky because it's about current clients. So that's where the account management comes in, and what's the point of growing if you're losing clients, right?
Right.
And so it's that dance. And so putting the cart before the horse is probably the best way to put it. It really is how you have to think about it. And there is a level of, I don't want to say risk, but a level of, you have to put your eggs in a certain basket and say, you know what, no, let's invest in either the technical team because we know we're going to be landing a bunch of business. And so let's lay that groundwork now,
Right.
Build process now before we get crazy busy. Or is it, hey, let's wait until the business comes in and then try and do that. So in our lifespan as a company, we've seen both sides of it, and
Sure.
neither one is ideal. And there's a certain level of risk with both, right? If you invest in a bunch of people and then business doesn't come, well, guess what? You just blew up your overhead.
Right.
Or people come in or new business comes in and you haven't invested in the people, and guess what? Your service is hurt by that. So it's hard to perfect, but I think taking care of the client at the end of the day, right? The ones that you have, the ones whose trust is with you already, is probably a little bit higher on the rung in my mind, just because that's ultimately what's most important. But I don't have a great answer for it because it is such a dance.
I don't think there is a correct answer, so it's great to get your perspective, and I do think you have to sort of think about both sides. Do I risk cutting into my margins today, or do I risk bringing on business that I can't effectively service? I mean, there's not an easy answer to that question. In an ideal world, you'd solve for both at the same time. Most folks don't have the budget or the resourcing to be able to do that. I do think I agree with you that given the choice, or if you have to go 60-40 or 70-30 here on the sort of pie chart, investing in existing client relationships that you've already spent the time, the money, the resourcing, the technical prowess to, win that business, generally speaking, it is going to cost less to retain a customer than to get a new one, right? So it does make sense to say, okay, if we're tight here and we have to make some tough decisions, let's make sure that we are, shored up on our ability to wow and delight and effectively deliver service to our existing customers. And hopefully there's some expansion, upsell, project work, and other stuff in the mix there. So it's not even just maintaining recurring revenue or thinking about it as sort of a flat rate or even a diminishing return, the better you get at your service delivery. But, you can also look for those other opportunities to sprinkle some other stuff in so that those relationships are becoming a little bit more valuable, or internally. And now I'm thinking about this from too many angles at the same time. But I think the third maybe leg of that stool is the better you get at automating and tightening up some of your own internal process and capabilities and workflows. Maybe there's work that you're getting paid the same amount of money for each month, but actually you're getting a little bit better at cutting down on the time it takes to deliver those services and capabilities. So you're becoming a little bit more profitable in that sense without actually having a price increase or increasing dollar amount on a contract, but you're, kind of getting a better ROI from that because you're becoming a little bit more efficient with the way you deliver or consume that service.
Processes are everything. Automation, as much as we can. It feels like a constant conversation, and I think it should be, but that's really how, that's how you end up being able to get more and more out of your existing client base, and without feeling like you have to do anything to strain the relationship, because you're already able to still provide great service, but internally you just get better and better at how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And again, the things what that looks like is just very different in the, 5 to 10 million range and 10 to 15 as opposed to 0 to 1. And the way
Yeah.
that you think about operational efficiency and sort of maturing, some of these processes. Also the tool set that you're using, right? You're probably not going to have the same, you're not
Yep.
you're not going to spend big platform money on day one. And you're also probably not going to, want to be stuck with spreadsheets and manual tracking and kind of process building and no documentation or anything like that once you're hitting
Yeah.
some of these more mature kind of strides in the business.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. I've got one last question here for you, Corbitt, and it's sort of thinking about sales kind of tying into the broader organization. I think this is true of a lot of small businesses, and we could probably pick on any department, but let's keep it on sales since that's been the focus of our chat here. And it's the idea of kind of breaking down silos and barriers as the organization matures. It's very easy to get stuck. Well, sales is over here selling. I've got the technical team and engineers in the back office that are, playing with all the knobs and dials and speeds and feeds and managing the tool set day to day. If I'm the CEO, I'm probably doing a little bit of all of that, honestly. In the early days, I'm wearing all the executive hats. Maybe we're doing a tiny bit of marketing. Maybe we're not doing much of that yet. What does it look like to, or is there a need to, maybe I'll ask it at an even higher level to start, to kind of integrate and align what the sales org is doing with other parts of the business? I get a sense that you're doing a lot of that because you've mentioned here several examples and anecdotes of, well, yeah, our leadership is regularly having conversations about these dynamics, and I'm trying to bring that to the sales team so that they're dialed in. Like, just talk through, even at a high level, what does it look like, or are there certain aspects of the business or certain functions within the organization that, an MSP owner or leader might wake up one day and say, hey, you know what? We are at a point in our journey where I need to bring sales more directly into the fold of what is happening in other parts of the business. Maybe one example you gave would be bringing the technical folks along for the ride. And maybe that's one good place to start. But what else is sort of goes through your mind when we're thinking about eliminating some of the kind of siloed work that happens in some of the early stages of growth and really making sure that, sales is kind of, permeated throughout the whole organization and not just off on their own island?
It's number one, EOS plays a huge part in that.
Sure.
But I think it's an age old, I feel like, challenge within the MSP space where you've got sales promising the world, and then now that engineering has to deliver on it or
Right.
help them, all that. And one of the things that we did, this is probably 2 years ago at this point, is implementing processes where anytime a new opportunity comes up, whether or not the sales engineer, that technical resource was on those meetings or not, because there are certain opportunities where our sales team can work through just about all of it without
Sure.
having to bring in. Obviously, there's others that are more complex and we need to bring them in for those preliminary discussions, but finding a way to have regular processes and meetings to where you're bringing in all the needed parties, whether it's project management, technical operations, service coordination, everyone who's going to have a part to play in that project, getting them in the room. And so they're able to weigh in before things get back out the door over to the prospect. They're weighing in. And so that way everything's accurate and they're kind of kept up to speed throughout the life cycle of the sale. Right. They're seeing the notes on things, they're talking through and providing feedback for
Right.
sales to then go back for that next meeting and talk through or gather whatever information is needed. So that is a way that we've been able to try and prevent there from being, hey, we just signed a client and just tossing it over the wall. And
Right.
now that creates friction between sales and operations. And I mentioned it before as well, but making sure, and maybe it's partly because of the process I just described, but making sure that when a new client does come in, it's not viewed as, sales, great job for doing that. No,
Right.
this was a team effort to do, and really making sure that that's actually felt and thought of in that way. But definitely having pre-sale, having the necessary parties be able to really weigh in on it,
Yeah.
rather than, even if you do have fellow salespeople go rogue, and you don't want that to happen because that's what's going to create the friction between departments and will push sales out to be on an island.
Sure. Yeah, ton of wise words in there. I think the visual of like not lobbing it over the fence is like that to me
Yeah.
really is exactly right. And I mean, this is the stuff we're talking about here is certainly not just in the MSP industry. This is true in many industries, many different size organizations. Arguably, once you hit a certain kind of larger scale and start to move up market, you have even worse versions of these problems where it's like, my part of the assembly line is done. It went out, down the line, and I don't have to worry about, that because I don't work in that part of the factory. So hugely important to not just lob stuff over the fence, have the conversations. You mentioned notes and documentation. I also think that's huge. And again, that early stage versus, more mid stage. In the early days, it's, free entry, scrappy little notes and chicken scratch. And, that more kind of mid stage maturing mindset, these things start to become, pick lists and standard, fields that we can then report on and say, why are we winning these deals? Why are we losing these deals? There's so many tools out there now, from a AI perspective that can listen to calls or conversations like the one we're having right now and pull out and transcribe some of these insights and help folks understand, what were the key phrases that got the prospect excited? What were the things that kind of put them off a little bit? And again, the sales org has such a different perspective and set of conversations than sometimes the technical folks and operations folks do. The more that can be shared and discussed together, it sounds like a no-brainer of course, why wouldn't you be getting all these folks together? But again, in practice, it's just not always that easy to carve the time and the space to go do it. So I think more than anything, what we're giving folks here is, a push to figure out how to carve the space to make this as important of a part of your sales and go-to-market engine as any of the other key components that you feel like are critical to success right now. Yeah,
it definitely has to be deliberate because the technical team is incredibly busy. They've got so much going on, and chances are they don't necessarily want to be involved with the sales process, but they really do when it comes down to it, because that otherwise they get, they're on the short end of the stick when things are promised or solutioned the wrong way or talked about in the wrong way, and then all of a sudden ultimately they have to deal with that, right? So we don't want that to happen, and so you got to get ahead of it and make it a deliberate part of the process.
You put in a little bit of effort and a little bit of time up front to avoid paying for it in a much greater way later. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just team harmony, it's huge. You got to have trust. If you don't have trust internally, how are you going to be able to have trust with clients? So
totally. Yeah, totally. If you're not all singing from the same song sheet, who are you to say, oh yeah, we're really great at this and we're all on the same page and we're going to have a great working relationship with customers if you're not even fostering that internally? Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, awesome. I love this conversation, Corbitt. I really appreciate your time. These are not sort of a binary, like there's one problem and one answer. This is really fluid stuff that has so many different factors and considerations based on the size of your business, the industries that you serve, even geographically, and some of the, your location can sometimes play a role in this, the kind of total addressable market that you're going after. So I love the perspective here. And as we think about growing and maturing the sales side of the organization, look for process, look for efficiency, always try to ladder your work back up to recurring revenue and annual revenue opportunities, even if you're doing some other stuff on the side, and really don't sleep on the importance of building and fostering the internal alignment and process muscle and dialogue that needs to happen to allow your organization to grow as one cohesive unit, which is a much kind of sharper and easier, quote unquote, path to success than trying to grow an organization with 5 or 6, different boats that might be in the same water, but you don't actually have people in the same boat rowing together in the same direction. So Corbitt Grow, Director of Business Development, Anderson Technologies, thank you so much for taking time to share your wisdom and insights here with our viewers on Synchronized.
Yeah, absolutely, Brandon. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, that'll do it for this episode, folks. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to Synchronized. If you found value in today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to Synchronized wherever you listen to your podcasts. Or visit us at syncromsp.com/podcast for more information. We look forward to guiding your journey from startup to scale up in our next episode. Until then, keep growing and innovating.